It's quite interesting when we just read the Bible and just hear what God has to say, instead of always trying to people sometimes use the Bible and always trying to find a new revelation, something different, but just the Bible just speaks to us plainly, doesn't it?
Just very, very mundane,
Yes.
very plain,
Yes.
very... I mean, today we were reading Elijah.
That's right, yes.
And Elijah's sitting there feeling sorry for himself,
Yes.
saying, I alone am left, Lord.
Sounds like us sometimes.
Yes, exactly. And I thought, well, that doesn't... I recognise that.
Yes.
But that beautiful verse where he says, and the God was not in the earthquake, he was not in the fire,
Right,
he
yes.
was not in all those things,
Yes.
and he was in a still small voice.
Right.
And it says how Elijah covered his face with his cloak and went out to the front of the cave.
Yes.
And really that covering his face with his cloak
Yes.
speaks of how amazing it is that
Yes.
God would even speak to us.
Yes.
How he condescends
Yes.
to speak to his children.
Yes.
I mean, he is the almighty, omnipotent God.
Yes.
And that he would deign to
Yes.
speak to us is amazing.
Wow.
And we can't take it for lightly.
Yes.
We can't take it for granted.
Yes.
And we can't kind of just say, hey, Dad,
Yes.
yeah, why don't you speak to us today, kind of thing.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
I mean, he's the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords.
That's right.
And that covering the face shows the absolute reverence and respect
Wow.
that
Yes.
Elijah had for
Wow.
God.
So you read through the Bible and then you go over it again. Do you find that each time God speaks, shows you something different from the same verse or the same story?
Totally, yeah.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden a new verse, collection of verses pops up,
Right.
and you think, oh my goodness me.
Yes.
And that speaks to you.
Yes.
So it was. It really has been a treasure trove.
So the Bible could really last someone a lifetime and beyond that, many generations.
Yes. I mean, these last 2 years, I can't tell you how the Bible has become so special
Right.
again.
Yes.
It was special before,
Yes.
but I can't. But it's even more special
Fresh manna every day.
every day.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, you're reading through the Bible, so most of it is going to be the Old Testament, because most of the books of the Bible are from the Old Testament. And some people have the idea that there's not much benefit in the Old Testament. What would you say to that?
Oh my goodness me. They miss out on so much.
Yes.
How could they say that?
Yes.
I mean, the relationship that Moses had with God,
Yes.
that is beyond belief.
Yes.
I mean, Moses would tell God things, and then God would say, Moses, I'm fed up with these people. And you know, you just understood that there was such a relationship
Yes.
between them.
Right.
And that God called Moses the meekest man in all the earth.
Yes.
And he said that I speak to you face to face.
Right.
And he didn't speak to anyone else like that.
Right.
So it's just that his relationship with God was outstanding.
Yes.
And if anyone thinks they can have anything
Yes.
anything much better,
Sure.
I'd like to find them because they would be a fountain of wisdom
Yes.
and okay, yes, it is wonderful that in the new covenant Jesus comes to live inside.
Yes.
But as my husband was sharing the other day,
Yes.
Moses moved under grace.
That's right. Yes.
In an amazing way.
Yes.
Twice he said to God,
Yes.
if I have found grace in thy sight.
Yes.
So I think you learn so much from from their relationship with God.
Yes. So this bread that comes from heaven, it doesn't go stale, does it?
Oh, not at all.
Yes.
It's wonderful,
Yes.
wonderful.
Are there any books or chapters or characters that stand out to you that you like reading about? Is there anything that stands out, or something you've maybe done recently, or?
Oh, I mean, one of my favourites is Moses.
Oh, right. Okay.
Really.
Yes.
When I read about his relationship with God, I say, Lord, if I had half that relationship.
Why do you say that? Why Moses? What is it about
Because
him?
they were so intimate together, and they didn't. Moses didn't hide from God what he thought. God didn't hide from Moses what he thought. They just said it out flat.
Do you find that sometimes people don't speak openly with God? They try to
Yeah, they
conceal
try and put on a good show.
Right. So Moses wasn't like that.
Not at all.
He had a few complaints, did he?
I mean, every now and again he would fling himself on the floor before God, absolutely horrified that
Yes.
God was going to leave them or
Yes.
because God had said to them, I'm not going to go with you.
Yes.
And he would fling himself on the floor, and so would Aaron, and they'd plead with God.
Yes.
I mean, Moses was horrified that God said he might not go with them.
Right.
His instant reaction was to fling himself on the floor and say, Lord, don't do that, don't do that,
Yes.
I can't cope without you.
Yes. Well, Moses, I mean, most people today are pastoring churches, maybe a few hundred people, 200, but Moses had millions of people.
Incredible. Incredible.
Yes. And I remember once we did talk, and it refers to the church in the wilderness.
Exactly.
Yes.
And Stephen calls it the church in the wilderness,
Right.
when he preaches in Acts chapter 7.
So-
And so we have so much to learn
Yes.
from them.
Yes.
And Moses had the key, you see. He
Right.
said they erred in unbelief because they did not know the ways of God.
Okay.
And that's how we get to know God, because we get to know his ways.
Right.
And if you don't study the Word of God, if you don't spend time with the Word of God,
Yes.
if you don't read and understand, how are you going to get to know the ways of God?
Yes.
You're not.
Yes.
And you're not going to have an understanding, so that when situations hit you
Yes.
and circumstances don't go the way you want them to,
Yes.
you know what God will do. You
Yes.
know you understand how
Yes.
God works.
Yes.
So you have confidence
Yes.
in God,
Yes.
that no matter what situation is, what happens,
Yes.
how it happens, God is in control.
So God doesn't change his ways.
Not at all.
So,
Never.
so God, the God you're
He takes you by surprise.
Yes. So the God that you're reading about there in the Old Testament is the same God in the New Testament. He hasn't
Exactly.
changed.
He doesn't change. He says, I change not.
Yes.
I am the Lord, I change not.
Okay. So you must find that, reading the Old Testament, and even though it's talking about thousands of years ago sometimes, it still relates to people today.
Oh, yes. Abraham, the father of the faithful.
Yes.
That's such a wonderful story.
Yes.
And how he messed up on occasions and tried to work things out.
Yes.
Because God had promised a son, and
Yes.
and he was waiting and waiting and
Yes.
waiting and waiting.
Yes.
And he thought he could give God a helping hand.
Yes.
And yet God understood
Yes.
and brought him back to the place where finally,
Yes.
when he was past 100 or 99,
Yes.
and Sarah was very old too,
Yes.
that they had a son.
Yes. So basically, people now sometimes they struggle with reading the Bible. So all they have to do is read the chapters and verse that you're talking about. Read that. You're not writing paragraphs and paragraphs and pages and pages.
No. It's they can. What I recommend is that they read the context,
Right.
because you must always read the Bible in context.
Okay.
You must never ever take little verses here and there, put them together, and make a doctrine, because that's where error comes from.
Right.
So if ever you're going to read the Bible, read it in context.
Right. Okay.
So I really recommend people spend the time to read where I took the verses from.